And I welcome Lorelle Dismore very much. She worked at our partner Newcastle University at the time of the project. Meanwhile, she's a project manager at Northumbria Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust. She's a health psychologist, and she worked and contributed very much on work package 1 and explored the experience of appetite loss in older age. So Lorelle, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. Apologies about the background. I'm working on an NHS computer, and NHS computers normally say no to making technical decisions on Zoom. But thank you, everybody, for joining the meeting today. So I'm going to talk about the qualitative aspect of the appetite project. And this was exploring appetite loss in older age, focusing on older adults living in the community rather than in a hospital or a care setting. Okay, so appetite loss is a common but under-recognised issue in older adults. Estimates suggest that between 15% and 30% of older adults living independently report poor appetite, but despite this, appetite loss is not routinely assessed in clinical practice. So that means many older adults experience appetite decline unnoticed until it leads to health problems. So over time, it can contribute to weight and muscle loss, increased risk of aging syndromes like frailty, sarcopenia, and even mortality. So detecting appetite loss before these health changes occur is key, but can only really happen if we understand what appetite loss feels like and what causes it. But most of what we know about appetite loss comes from studies in hospitalised or malnourished older adults. And appetite changes in the general community may look quite different. So appetite loss is often accepted as a normal part of ageing, related to changes in taste, smell, and digestion. But actually, there's maybe a more complex story behind it. And so this qualitative study really set out to fill that gap. So our aim was to explore the lived experience of older adults with poor appetite, how they understand and manage the appetite loss, and what influences it. And this was to provide findings to enable the scientific and clinical community to think about preventative and treatment strategies that are person-centred and really grounded in older adults' real experiences. So I put this slide in really to set the scene as to why we thought a qualitative approach was important. And this really comes down to exploring the hows and the whys. So how are people experiencing poor appetite? What are the reasons contributing to poor appetite? And this approach allowed to look at certain events, behaviours and decisions and how they occur. So a qualitative approach enabled an in-depth understanding of participants' perspectives, experiences, and the context in which these take place. So it offers insights into reasoning and processes that underlie outcomes. And this approach is particularly valuable for generating new theories about poorly understood situations and for exploring the processes that lead to specific results. And a key strength of qualitative research is its flexibility and adaptability, allowing the researcher to refine questions and methods as understanding deepens. So data collection analysis occur to ensure that the data is meaningful. So how are we showing depth and insight and a rich evidence base to contribute to understandings? So in terms of work package 1, we carried out the study in 2 stages. In stage 1, we formed a patient and public involvement group or PPI group, and this was made up of 10 older adults who helped shape the study, discuss key issues around appetite loss, and help design our interview questions. And in stage 2, we conducted semi-structured interviews with 13 older adults who were experiencing poor appetite. Participants were recruited through Voice, which is a citizens' research network that connects researchers with the public. To take part, individuals completed an online simplified nutritional appetite questionnaire, or the SNAC tool. Those scoring below 14 were considered to have poor appetite and were invited to be interviewed. So the 13 older adults who were interviewed offered a range of lived experiences on the influence of appetite decline, their experience of living with poor appetite, and they were also asked about the acceptability and methods of use of a nutrient powder to fortify foods. So interviews were analysed using reflexive thematic analysis. So this means that we didn't start with any preset categories. Instead, we allowed themes to emerge naturally from what the participants told us. Codes and themes were refined throughout repeated discussions among the research team and also with our patient and public involvement group, who helped us interpret the data through their own experiences. So from this process, we identified 3 overarching themes. The first theme was a complex web of influences on appetite loss that involved biological, psychological, and social factors. The second theme was around living with poor appetite, and this was variation in perceptions and attitudes towards appetite loss. And then the third theme was the role of the eating environment and how social interaction shaped appetite. Together, these themes highlighted that appetite loss is not a single, simple phenomenon. It's personal, multifactorial, and embedded in everyday life. So theme 1 looked at a complex web of influences. So appetite loss arises from biological, psychological, and social factors, and each participant's journey to poor appetite was unique, shaped by overlapping influences from these different 3 elements. For biological factors, many participants attributed appetite changes to aging and reduced physical activity. As one man said, "I certainly eat less now than even 5 years ago because I don't do as much." Others linked appetite loss to illness or medication side effects. For example, the diabetic drugs are the main ones that have an effect on my appetite, and daily fatigue also played a role, with some saying that they were just simply too tired to prioritise eating. Psychological factors included emotional well-being, so this was strongly tied to appetite. As one man shared, "When I'm going through a bad patch, I should eat something really, but I can't be bothered. When I'm going through a good patch, my appetite is good." So depression, anxiety, and stress often reduce the desire or motivation to eat, with some participants describing food as no longer being a pleasurable experience. The social context also mattered, so participants described how living alone, retirement, or a loss of routine reduced appetite. So cooking for oneself, no, it becomes worse as one gets older. For isolated older adults, there were less social cues for meal times. So theme 1 tells us that appetite loss in older age is rarely caused by one thing. Instead, it's the interaction between physical health, mental health, and social circumstances. And it looks like a biopsychosocial web of influences. And this is what you can see on this slide here. So this is what we call a thematic map to really illustrate how these 3 factors can influence poor appetite. So it can be a combination of all 3 of these factors, but one might show up more than the other depending on the individual, but all 3 are important and provide some insights into how we might want to tailor interventions. Okay, so theme 2 was focused on perceptions and attitudes. So this is how older adults perceived and responded to poor appetite. So even though all of our participants scored low on the SNAC questionnaire, their recognition of appetite loss varied widely. There was often a poor recognition or acceptance of poor appetite. For example, one lady said, "I don't know why I'm changing. Food still smells delicious, but I don't want to eat it." And then others denied it entirely, saying things like, "I'm satisfied I eat enough. I don't think it would cause me to be worried." This lack of awareness can have implications because it means appetite loss can go unnoticed until malnutrition develops. Several participants described eating purely for survival and not enjoyment. For example, I eat to live, I don't live to eat. It's like putting petrol in your car. So for those individuals, food was viewed only as fuel and again, not as a pleasurable eating experience. Others did develop strategies to manage the poor appetite, for example, eating smaller portions or snacking through the day, or choosing foods that required less effort to prepare. As one participant put it, I graze, I wouldn't consider I have proper times for meals. However, for some, even small meals felt quite overwhelming. So when I look at the plate, I could vomit, it's difficult. So perceptions and coping strategies varied greatly. Some adults normalised appetite, others denied it, and a few tried to adapt through practical routines. So these differences are quite crucial to understanding when designing support or interventions. And then theme 3 was centred on where and whom older adults eat. And this had a profound influence on appetite. So eating with others was almost always associated with greater enjoyment, and it helped stimulate appetite as well. So if I'm eating socially, my appetite improves. I'd never have a 3-course at home, but I can manage that when I'm out with friends. Social interaction provided stimulation, conversation, there's a general sense of occasion, and this all encouraged eating. By contrast, those who ate alone often described a lack of motivation. Can I be bothered to chop the onions just for one person? So for many, cooking and eating alone was seen as being chores, leading to irregular meals and reduced intake. So this theme really highlights the social context of eating, things like companionship, and how the setting can be just as important as the food itself. So maybe encouraging shared meals or social dining opportunities could play a role in supporting appetite. So some of the take-home key messages from the themes that were generated. So we know that appetite loss results from a complex interplay of the biological, the psychological, and the social influences. Psychological factors, social interaction, and the eating environment are modifiable factors. So things that we can intervene on to help support better appetite. There's marked differences in awareness and attitudes towards appetite loss. So many older adults can be unaware of their appetite decline. And there were variable coping strategies, meaning we need better screening, education, and interventions underpinned by the biopsychosocial model. From a consumer perspective, when they were asked about novel food products, participants were asked to share their thoughts on how they feel about using it, particularly for designing to stimulate appetite, and overall responses were positive. But from a consumer perspective, they emphasised the importance of considering the product's cost. They also noted that older adults would need to understand the purpose of using it. So this might be challenging for those who don't recognise that they have poor appetite. Several practical suggestions were made regarding the product's usability, for instance, the package design and the ease of use, particularly for individuals who might have arthritis in the hands. Participants mentioned that a powdered form might be unsuitable for those with swallowing difficulties. They also raised questions about the product's shelf life and whether it would come in a single use or a pre-measured portion. Transparency about the product's composition was considered essential. Participants highlighted the need to accommodate specific dietary requirements, such as those with celiac disease. They also felt that the product should ideally be recommended by a credible source, such as a healthcare professional, rather than promoted by a commercial or industry company. But overall, they did indicate that they'd be willing to try it, but it would depend on whether they perceived a need for it. And less physically active individuals expressed concern about potential weight gain. But overall, there was acceptability of the use of novel food products, and it was received positively. Methods of use of a nutrient powder to fortified foods requires an awareness and an understanding. So why do people want to use this? And the consumer needs confidence in the product and its value. And then we need to make sure that we're offering practical solutions alongside the products, such as like a booklet of recipes, especially for those who find it difficult to motivate themselves to prepare food, and concerns about using it included things like the cost, the composition, and the safety. So in terms of the implications, so firstly, appetite loss is influenced by a complex range of factors, as I've already emphasised, the biological, the psychological, the social, and these can vary greatly from person to person. So because of that, maybe a one-size-fits-all solution might not be the best approach, and we need to consider how we design interventions underpinned by the biopsychosocial model. So how do we make it a person-centred approach that considers these different individual differences? There's also an opportunity to address psychological and social factors, since these are modifiable and can make a real difference in managing appetite loss. So the factors influencing appetite loss also affect how people experience and adapt to living with poor appetite, and this can have direct implications. So we need to think beyond just medical interventions and consider the broader experience of the individual. And finally, with there being a poor awareness or even acceptance of appetite loss, this maybe highlights the importance of early screening and proactive conversations, so that issues can be identified and managed before they become really severe. So maybe even embedding some routine screening into clinical practice. So this work is published in the BMC Geriatrics. So if you would like to have a look at that in more detail, that's where you'll find it. And I think that brings me to the close. So I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you very much, Lorelle, for being here also, despite your new job, and also for all your work in the project in the past, and for these nice presentations. Presentation, yeah. There are no questions yet. I would like to invite the audience to ask questions. I think your results were very important for the whole project and for shaping also our intervention. But what do you think about the social and psychological aspects? Would you have any idea how to better consider these influences in the future?
Yeah, I do think that if we can intervene from a social aspect, then you'd improve a person's psychological function. So I think a lot of the experiences around appetite losses, there's a lot of loneliness that can be quite apparent in a lot of older adults, especially those living alone. And as people, what they were telling me is that there was less opportunities to go out and have those social interactions. And I think that can also contribute to poor psychological functioning. So I think if we can look at interventions that really maybe a peer support approach, get people to buddy up with people, if we can improve that, we might see some positive aspects on somebody's overall well-being. So then we're targeting both, so that hopefully those people will take more enjoyment in eating food, and they won't just see it as a necessary thing to just be surviving and for fueling the engine. As I think it's that relationship with food and how they view it as well, that can be quite important. And targeting those different health beliefs. I think another issue was that they didn't recognise that they have poor appetite. So how can we encourage behaviour change if somebody's doesn't know that they've got an issue with it? So maybe some psychoeducation around that as well, to show people, to get them to recognise that they have poor appetite and they know the importance of what it means to be under eating.
Yeah, so the social aspect, I think should be more focused in the future. And there is one question in the chat, meanwhile. a very clear, nice presentation. Can you give some comments about the social meal importance? I'm not sure if that is now already answered.
Yeah, I think we've already answered that one. And I think it's just trying to think of more of those psychosocial interventions and how do we encourage people to be more socially active.
And another question is about our food products. Was the idea of the powder coming from the researchers or from the older people?
The older people. So there was a couple of participants that expressed that they had difficulty swallowing. I think somebody actually had a medical condition that was impacting that. So they said that if they were to use a powder, they'd be worried that find it difficult to actually swallow the powder.
Yeah, but the powder is not consumed solely, but included in other foods. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, thank you again, Lorelle. I think we will continue with the next presentation, and I'm very happy that Marjolein Visser is presenting the next part. She's a full professor at University Amsterdam at Faculty of Science and at Amsterdam Public Health. And she studied human nutrition at University of Wageningen and has a huge experience in the field of nutrition in older people. And I'm very happy that you are here, Marjolein, and report the results of a PhD, which were worked out with a PhD student at our department, Pia Schäufele, who was unfortunately unable to join today. But we had a very close cooperation with Marjolein in this project, so I'm very happy that you will present these results now.
Thank you, Dorothee, for that kind introduction. Yes, I will talk a bit about the second part of Work Package 1. You've all just heard the qualitative study from Work Package 1, and I will address the more quantitative part of Work Package 1. So you've heard before in the two previous talks the important problem of anorexia of aging in older people, which is caused by, for example, physiological factors like a decreased secretion or a changed sensitivity to appetite-related hormones. Of course, we also heard about a change in sensory perception in older adults. And lastly, there's a variety of factors, also social factors that Lorelle already addressed, but also factors related to diseases, for example, and medication use that can all impact anorexia of aging. So we see in many older people a reduction in appetite with aging and sometimes also a reduction in food intake. With a prevalence of poor appetite of up to 27% in community-dwelling older adults. And we know from prospective studies that a poor appetite is related to weight loss and adverse health outcomes and thus should be prevented as much as possible. So now my presentation will actually consist of two parts, which are also two different papers that we published. In the first part, we will talk about general characteristics of older adults with a poor appetite. And we mainly wanted to identify those community-dwelling older adults that are at higher risk of having a poor appetite. And in the second part, we will discuss the dietary characteristics. So what are these people actually eating and how is that different from people with a normal appetite? So considering the first part, there are already previous studies where conducted in different domains where factors have been associated with anorexia of aging in the physical domain, emotional, cognitive domain, social domain, and lifestyle domain. But there are not many studies, actually we could find only one, where these multiple domains are included in the same study. And there's one study conducted in the United States of America, using data of the health, aging, and body composition studies, where multivariate analysis were conducted to determine the potential determinants of poor appetite. So we wanted to address this same topic in data from Europe. So we used data from the longitudinal aging study Amsterdam in a nice collaboration between Amsterdam and Germany. So this is a prospective cohort study, and the older adults involved are representative of the Dutch population. And for this specific analysis, we used data collected in 2015 and 16. We only included those of 70 years and older, and those who had complete appetite data. So appetite for this first analysis was assessed using one item of the Center for Epidemiologic Studies depression scale, which is a multi-item scale to assess depressive symptoms. And one of these items says, during the last week, I did not feel like eating, my appetite was poor. And people could respond to that item with 4 different response categories. And based on our previous work relating appetite to health outcomes, we dichotomized this variable. So people who responded rarely or none of the time were considered to have normal appetite, and people in the other 3 categories were considered to have a poor appetite. So this dichotomization was based on previous work. Now, we picked the LASA study because it has a wealth on data from the different domains of aging. So not only demographic data, but also a lot of factors in the physical domain, emotional domain, cognitive domain, the social domain, and the lifestyle domain. So we had over 800 people in this analysis with a mean age of 77, about 50% male, female. Body mass index around 27, which is normal for the Dutch community dwelling population. And about half of them had 2 or more diseases. The prevalence of poor appetite in our study was about 16%. And there were, if we zoom in a bit in the population and see where the prevalence of poor appetite was highest, it was 55% in those who reported chewing problems. So that's really a high percentage of poor appetite. It was 35% in those who experienced unintentional weight loss, and 34% in those who sometimes feel lonely. So this slide shows the result of the single domain logistic regression model. So this is not adjusted for any confounders and also not adjusted for any other domain. And in white, you see the factors who were univariately related to poor appetite. So what is striking is that you see in all the domains that were included, you see a determinant of poor appetite. So this really shows what Lorelle already referred to, that's really a multi-dimensional problem, having a poor appetite. We then took the next step, which is why we conducted the study, to put all the variables or potential determinants that were significantly associated with poor appetite in the univariate model. We combined them all in a multi-domain model. And here you see them, quite busy slide, but what you see is that all the variables that are bold were positively related or negatively related to having a poor appetite. So we saw that older women were more likely to report a poor appetite compared to older men. Those who had polypharmacy were more likely to report a poor appetite. Those with chewing problems were more likely, this actually was a very strong association. Those who experienced any unintentional weight loss in the past 6 months were more likely to report a poor appetite at 3-fold higher risk. And those with more depressive symptoms were more likely to report a poor appetite. And in this variable depressive symptoms, we excluded the appetite domain because otherwise you would inflate the association. So it was independent of that. So in the second part of this quantitative analysis, we looked at the dietary characteristics of all the persons with a poor appetite. We already know from studies that poor appetite is a major risk factor for weight loss and malnutrition, and that was already shown by Dorothee in this nice DoMap model. But what older people with a poor appetite are actually eating, we do not really know. There's only, well, 2 studies that we conducted in the past where this was the focus of the study. So in the first study, we did a forced choice experiment in people experiencing a poor appetite. And they had to pick their preference with regard to 2 pictures of plates or foods. And one of the findings there is that people with a poor appetite really prefer foods, variation in foods, and for example, also variation in color of foods. And the second study that we did previously using data again from the US, from the Health, Aging and Body Composition study, we looked at the dietary patterns and dietary components of people with a poor appetite versus a normal appetite. And one of the striking findings there was that people with a poor appetite generally eat more sweets, more dairy, they relatively eat more fats and drank a lot more sodas. But this is only one study that has been previously conducted using US data. So again, we decided in the Appetite Project to do this in European data as well. So again, we use data from the longitudinal aging study Amsterdam, and we now use data from a specific ancillary study of the cohort, which was a dietary ancillary study conducted in 2014-15. And we included in this analysis, again, only people aged 70 and older who had complete appetite data and who had complete and valid dietary data. And in this study, we added, in this ancillary study, we were able to add a lot more appetite-related questions, and we also included the appetite scale, which is the simplified nutritional appetite questionnaire, the SNAC, which has a sum score ranging from 4 to 20. So this scale consists of 4 items, and for every item you can have a score of 1 to 5. So the total score is 4 to 20. And everybody with a score of 14 and lower is considered to have a poor appetite. And this is based also on previous work where this lower score is related to subsequent weight loss. We assessed the diet using a food frequency questionnaire with 238 items, so quite an extensive food frequency questionnaire, where we looked at energy, macro and micronutrients, food groups, as well as 2 dietary quality indices. The first one is the Dutch Healthy Eating Index. So it assesses how well people adhere to the Dutch National Dietary Guidelines. And the second quality index was the Mediterranean Diet Score, which is probably familiar to most of you. So this food frequency questionnaire was validated in the LASA study against 3 24-hour dietary recalls. So we included about 600 people in this analysis with a mean age of 78 years, and again, half of the population being female. The prevalence of poor appetite was slightly lower, 12.5% in this group. And if you look at the actual ranges in SNAC scores, you see that there's about a 4-point difference in the medians between the normal appetite group and the poor appetite group. So again, we dichotomized based on appetite, and you see that the scores are quite different between the 2 groups. So when we first look at the macronutrients and energy, here you see the results, the mean results of the poor appetite group, the normal appetite group, the poor appetite group. And this is the p-value of a simple unadjusted tests between the 2 groups. I only highlight the significant results in green of these p-values, and we were quite strict. We only used p-values less than 0.004 as being statistically significant because of the multiple comparisons that we did in the study. And in the last column, you see the adjusted odds ratio. Again, the cell is highlighted in green when there is an adjusted association between the dietary characteristic and the poor appetite. So poor appetite is the dependent variable here. And on the bottom of the slide, you see the factors that we adjusted for. So several confounders and also including energy intake for the nutrient analyses. So what you do see here is that people with a poor appetite generally eat more carbohydrates, and that people with a poor appetite generally eat less protein. So this really confirms the US results that we previously published. Here you see the results of for the micronutrients, the vitamins, and some of the minerals. Again, you do see some differences between the two groups if you look at the unadjusted results, and some of the significance remained when we adjusted for potential confounders. So there was an indication that people with a poor appetite actually consumed more vitamin B2, but I think also based on the confidence interval, we should be careful in interpreting this finding. They did have a higher intake of vitamin C, but a lower intake of folate and zinc. For the food groups, again, unadjusted, we saw some clear differences. They consumed less vegetables, people with a poor appetite. They consume less meat and less alcoholic beverages. But only the vegetable was different between the two groups. So the poor appetite people generally eat less vegetables. So when we look at the overall diet quality, which of course captures a lot of these different aspects that I just discussed, there was really a strong difference between the two groups, that generally people with a poor appetite do have a poor diet quality. And this was very consistent for the two dietary quality indices that we included in the study. So to overall conclude from the first part, some characteristics that identify people with a poor appetite were considered, which were female sex. Also, all the people with polypharmacy or chewing problems were more likely to experience poor appetite. Those who already experienced unintentional weight loss in the past 6 months, and those with more depressive symptoms. So this confirms some of the findings of previous studies. And I think that especially in these groups, it would be very important to monitor nutritional status, as we know that these people with a poor appetite have a higher risk of weight loss in the future and developing malnutrition. So it could really serve as a first a signal or sign to be more aware of potential nutritional problems in these people. And the second finding was that all the persons with a poor appetite have a lower intake of protein, folate, zinc, and lower vegetable intake, which of course is a major contributor to fiber. So I think that really fits the project. And they had a higher intake of carbohydrates, vitamin B12 and vitamin C. And overall, they have a poor dietary quality. So I think for clinical practice, the knowledge of appetite status, I think, is very relevant to have, especially since this has a risk for certain nutritional deficiencies. And monitoring actually the dietary intake of people with a poor appetite would be very valuable also in trying to prevent the development of future weight loss and prevent malnutrition, and make the dietary adaptation and adjustments that are necessary and that are possible for the older person to try to prevent this weight loss. So if you would like to read more about these two studies, I would like to refer you to these two wonderful papers written by Pia Scheuvelen, published in the European Journal of Nutrition and in Age and Aging. So I would first really like to acknowledge the hard work of the PhD student Pia Scheuvelen under the supervision of the statistician Anja Rappel and the well-known nutritionist Eva Kieswetter and Dorothee Volkert. I think she did an excellent job in analyzing these data and writing these wonderful papers. And of course, I would like to acknowledge the wonderful contribution of our LASA study participants. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for their attention, and I'm happy to ask any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Marjolein, for this perfect overview about an important part of the project. There are directly several questions. The first is very interesting. Do we know what the prevalence of poor appetite in younger adults is? I never thought about that. We all know that obesity is a major problem in younger adults, and I'm not aware about representative figures in younger adults. Do you know something about that?
No, I don't know about it. I think there might probably some data of younger adults with chronic diseases or hospitalized younger adults, but community dwelling older adults, I'm not aware that these data are there. It's actually interesting because, of course, you have the different factors that might involve appetite in older age are probably also likely to involve appetite in young age. For example, depressive symptoms, I can imagine.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen any data, no.
Also think it's related to diseases mostly, or
Yes.
psychological problems. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question is, I think, just a correction or to be sure to have it correctly reported about vitamin B12 was not also significantly lower.
No,
Because it was written vitamin B2 and I think you mentioned vitamin B12, which was a bit confusing.
no, it was B2 actually.
Yeah.
But B12 was not significantly lower, which at first hand surprised me a bit as well. But they do eat less meat, people with an older appetite, but they still do eat meat. But interesting, the dairy consumption and cheese consumption, well, the Netherlands is a dairy country, but there were not any differences between the two, or of very little differences. And also the egg consumption was generally similar. So I think these are the sources which might be sufficient for these people to still obtain sufficient vitamin B12. Yeah.
Yeah. And question to the first part, how were chewing problems assessed? Was it subjective or objective?
Subjective. We have an oral health questionnaire that we always, in every examination that we collect in every examination of LASA. So there are a couple of questions on oral health, and one of them if they experience chewing problems. And that's also how the question is asked. And it was a very strong determinant of poor appetite. Yeah, it was really striking.
Yeah. And there are two other questions regarding the intake part. I'm wondering how accurate these questionnaires to assess nutrient intake in older adults are.
Yeah, very good question. We also have an extensive cognitive domain within the LASA study. So I know, and that's what we checked, the people who completed the food frequency questionnaire, there were not people included that had an MMSE of very low with very low values. So I don't think that the data will be biased by very low MMSE values. We generally have very good results when we did the validation study. So we validated the data against 3 24-hour dietary recalls.
Also in older people.
Also in older people, actually in LASA participants. So we had a random selection of LASA respondents, who we included in this validation study. So it's the same population, same country, same wording. With regard to complete dietary information, we received back completed FFQs for I think 1,450 people, and we had to exclude the data, or we did exclude the data from 7 people who skipped too many items in the questionnaire. So if anybody skipped more than 10 items in the questionnaire, we did not include that person in the data analysis. So that's a very low percentage of the total sample. Yeah.
And the other question was about the selection bias by using only complete dietary information data.
Yeah, but since we're just seven FFQs that we had to exclude of the almost 1,500, I think we're fine.
Okay, I think we have to go on. Thank you very much again.